time, and then we will touch over the COVID-19 response that's occurred at the VA now, occurring with the new shift or the new wave of infections. So one more thing that we need to talk about: if you have any questions or concerns or verbal abuse for the speaker, please hold on to that until the end of the session. You can always type that in the Q&A box, and we'll get to that at the end of this presentation. So without further delay, let's go ahead and try and put you to sleep with a historical review of the Department of Veteran Affairs. From World War II up to about 1998, the Department of Veteran Affairs existed really as an independent agency. It really had very little government oversight. And over that time, though, it became a larger entity. It no longer just working on benefits or getting money, pensions to their veterans. The group sort of grew exponentially. It covered the GI Bill. It covered health insurance. It then began to operate nursing homes and halfway houses, basically, during that time. So it really, the scope and magnitude of what this agency meant to do really changed over that time. So in 1988, one of Ronald Reagan's final acts was the Department of Veteran Affairs Act of 1988. He went ahead and promoted the VA from one of those independent government agencies all the way up to a cabinet level position. And doing so, it brought over a lot of government oversight. The budget became a little bit more, it becoming very inflated. So it was going to have a lot more to do with what it was going to minimize and try and streamline its process. So it also broke it down, the VA, into three specific parts, which we'll go over in just a moment: the Veteran Health Administration, the Veteran Benefit Administration, and the National Cemetery Administration. So from 1988 all the way up to today, the department has not changed at all, except for size. In 88 and the early 90s, it was a very large, it was a bloated agency. For the next 10 years after they downsized, it became a significant problem due to not having enough resources to really cover what they needed to do. So they went into a hiring frenzy, and today we've sort of seen the crest of that hiring and their advancement right now. So things seem to be in a very good spot for the VA growth-wise. They are a very respected agency for all their medical advances. However, how you interact with the VA might be very different in how you interact and how you characterize that interaction. So the 21st century, the present-day department, we talked about this a little bit with three columns that have come into existence, but we'll also go over the Secretary of Veteran Affairs. That's Robert Wilkie, and I believe he will be resigning on the 20th of this month, regardless of what happened. But I am not aware of who the new Secretary of Veteran Affairs will be. It should be a very interesting pick, considering how far the department has come in the past four years underneath various individuals, including Mr. Wilkie. And then an administrative law tip: if you want to sue the VA, you need to sue the secretary, who in this case is Mr. Wilkie. You do not sue the agency itself. It will be thrown out of court. And then going back to those three primary responsibilities: Veteran Benefit Administration. This is veteran registration, the eligibility determination role, and then the five business lines that make up a lot of their income and a lot of their expenditure: home loans, insurance, vocational rehab, the GI Bill, and the pension fund. So they're over a lot of money. The second column, National Cemetery Administration. This group is responsible for all memorial services and the vet cemeteries that you see throughout the country. The most notable one being Arlington. Any of those individuals that have a funeral and they were vets, if you've seen a 21-gun salute or the flag being folded there or color guard, those individuals had to go through this department to have that honor given at the funeral. So they have a very they are very responsible. They have a very intricate way of doing things in this department, but they are also very well run. And then that brings us to the Veteran Health Administration. That's what we colloquially call the VA. It's what we deal with in healthcare if you're billing the VA, Veteran Administration Department, every day. So they are responsible for providing healthcare in all forms. The biomedical research arm that's done an extreme amount of good work that's helped us later on in discoveries and whatnot. And then they're over the healthcare network maintenance component. So going over more of a historical background, the old way that the VA processed claims was extraordinarily manual versus what they do today. So to show you how far we've come and how many resources were involved with it at the beginning, I really do like to show the historical context of this. So originally, and this is back in 2001, 2002. So original claim processing. Individual vet comes into your hospital, you are able to get a authorization, or you're not able to get an authorization for that service, and that individual is discharged. That claim needs to be sent to the VA. Unfortunately, it's not going to be sent electronically. It's going to be mailed, and you're going to have to compile the entire packet, UB, itemized statement, the HCFA, and the entire medical record. That has to be compiled and put in a envelope or a manila envelope and sent off to the VA manually. Fee bases would then receive that, and that's taking a lot into consideration. The VA has a mail problem. We've known that for a very long time. Watchdog found boxes of mail in the fee basis department that had been untouched for years. So we know where that mail was ending up sometimes. But in the off event that it actually was received, the VA fee basis would then review that claim with three questions in mind. Is the patient a veteran? Is the patient's injury related to service? And is the patient's claim authorized correctly? Diving into those questions a little bit more specifically, is the patient a vet? People have stolen valor before, whether or not they're a registered veteran, or whether they've been determined to be an expired veteran, i.e. they were declared terminated prior to this service. So there are a lot of issues that came about with that question. So there was a lot of verification that needed to be made. The second question, patient's injury related to service. This is really more applicable after the Millennium Bill that was passed by George W. Bush. It allowed non-service injuries to be for the VA to compensate those. So if your vet had a service-related injury, it's paid at 100% of Medicare. That non-service-related injury is paid at 75th percentile of Medicare, which generally is 69.5 to 70.5% of Medicare value. And then the final question, is the patient's claim authorized correctly? Was it for the correct procedure, for correct stay, or for the correct individual? Once all three of those questions were reviewed and they were answered in the affirmative, the VA would then process and pay that claim. If for some reason that claim's billed amount was over $75,000, $100,000, or $125,000, that claim would then go off to Washington, D.C. for a manual scoring review due to high cost. So it would look at that. If the same questions had the same answers, the claim would then be processed and paid by Department of Treasury. If for some reason the claim was denied, you might get your explanation of benefits within 90 days. If you were very lucky, you might get it within 60 days. And then from there, you had a limited appeal right to really go after any type of denial. And we'll talk about that later on in the presentation, but it's not really all that successful to go after the VA in some cases. So with that being said, 2001, 2002, we're going to really come up to about 2013, 2014. Barack Obama signed the VACA Act of 2013. That's the Veterans Access Choice Administration, Veterans Access Choice Act of 2013. That created the Patient Community Care Center program, which is also known as Veteran Choice. The PC3 program was really the first step making the VA look and act as a private insurance carrier. So to work through that, the PC3 program had four eligibility options. First, if there was a VA medical center that was outside of 40 miles from you, you could actually go out to a civilian hospital and get treatment. If the wait list was over 30 days, you could go and get treatment at another facility. Services are not available at that Veteran Administration Medical Center. You were allowed to go outside of the net or the bubble, so to speak. And then the closest Veteran Administration Medical Center was not easily accessible. So you have three objective standards and one subjective. That one subjective became a little bit of an issue. Vets tried to use that incorrectly, and they would no longer have the opportunity to go and find care outside of the network. So to get authorization, there were two ways that could happen. The veteran could go through TriWest, which happened to be the third-party administrator in this case, and they would confirm choice eligibility, and then they would go outside and try and find someone that would take the veteran. Or the VA could send a referral to TriWest, and then they would go through the program and try and find an individual entity that would take the individual that would take that veteran for processing of their episode of care. Same type of process at that point. Once they accept it, once the hospital accepted that veteran, they would go through the episode of care, and then the claim would then be mailed out. The claim submission process in this case was a little bit different. So the uniform bill, the itemized statement, and the MedRec, they would go to TriWest within 180 days. That time period's now been shortened to 120 in some cases, and then it's been extended again. It's really a sliding scale sometimes with what TriWest wants to do. And then the medical records needed to be submitted to the VA, that local fee-based department, within 30 days of discharge. That way, the VA and TriWest would be able to match up the authorization, make sure everything matched what was requested, and then they would approve and process the claim. If for some reason it was denied, they would go ahead and deny it and send out an denial EOB that you would get within a couple of weeks, and you still had the same appeal right of 90 days. So that brings us to our first polling question. What do you find the most frustrating with veteran administration claims? A, difficulty with patient registration. B, determining what documentation should be sent. C, where do I capture an authorization? And D, do we need to appeal this claim? And with all the things that keep happening with the VA in the past 4 or 5 years, veteran claims are becoming more and more difficult because they are beginning to mimic commercial aspects. A lot of different interpretations of what to do, a lot of different ways in which authorizations can be obtained, a lot of different ways in which claims can be submitted. So there's not really a clear authority on it either. The VA really likes to make that knowledge very easy to access. If you go to their website, you can spend hours getting the 404 redaction page, so it does not exist or you can't find it. So with all of those issues, it makes it really difficult to work with this particular group. And with that being said, looks like for polling one, we have a tie, determining where documents should be sent and knowing where to capture an authorization. So difficulty with patient registration came in fourth, and deciding if it's necessary to appeal a claim came in third. So that's a good showing of what we're going to be talking about as well. We'll talk a lot about where documents need to go, and then we'll also talk about the portal also regarding authorizations here in a few minutes. So that brings us to the Mission Act. The government loves acronyms. In this case, it is an absolutely killer one. The Maintaining Internal Systems and Strengthening Integrated Outside Network Act. I wish they would figure out how to make them a little bit longer. I want to keep going and talking even more. But this act was passed by President Trump, and it went into back on 23rd, 2018, and it became effective on June the 6th of 2019. And it had two effects. One, it established the Veteran Community Care Program. This is known as the CCN network, the Community Care Network that Optum and TriWest now split between the two of them. And this was meant to make things even easier for a vet to go outside the veteran network and get care at civilian hospitals. And then it also terminated the Veteran Choice Program. So unfortunately, at the same time, due to concerns with how choice was being run out at that point, they decided to give it a lot longer of a tail than they normally would. It should have ended on June the 6th of 2019. They gave it another year after that for June the 1st of 2020. And then after seeing the COVID effect and then Optum having a very unsuccessful rollout in some of the regions, they decided to extend it another year with a very definitive termination date of June 1, 2021. So veteran choice will officially run out on that date. There will be no more additional funding through any of the congressional acts for budgetary reasons. It was not included. There were no additional funds included in the last budget round that went through. So it seems to be the final call for the veteran choice program to be terminated. So going back to that first part about veteran eligibility being easier underneath the Mission Act, I'm not going to go through this entire slide. I'm just going to talk about the part that's highlighted so that everyone here can be rest assured I'm not going to lecture them and read to them anymore about it. But the number 0.5 really was supposed to make it even more subjective and allow vets more opportunities and inroads to civilian hospitals. So if that veteran and their referring clinician determine there's going to be a better medical interest, there's going to be a better medical interest served by going outside the veteran network, they could gain eligibility at that point to go outside and find another hospital to receive treatment at. Well, the options that were given, the criteria, were very across the board. And to say that veterans did not understand it at first was an understatement. They received a lot of literature trying to educate them. And unfortunately, some were just confused to the point that they just kept going to the VA. And they were not going to get any better service than what they would get there. Unfortunately, after a little bit of education by the VA, vets have been able to access and utilize the Mission Act a lot more freely, and given them the opportunity to find care in better circumstances. So it's actually been very successful thus far. Vets have been very happy with it after the extremely difficult rollout at the beginning. So that brings us to the claim submission process under Mission Act. So things did change on June the 6th. Under Mission, there are two ways in which a claim can be processed, and it's really dependent upon whether it's authorized versus non-authorized. If that claim is authorized at that point of when the patient registers or begins treatment, the hospital needs to send the claim to TriWest, and that goes with the claim, the uniform bill, the itemized statement. Those items go to TriWest, while still the medical records go to the VA along with a copy of the uniform bill, so they're able to match up everything. So once those things cross and they're matched up, just like before with the PC3 program, once everything's matched and the authorizations are good to go, those items are then confirmed and the claim is then processed and paid by TriWest. So again, they're trying to accelerate and be more of a commercial payer in that regard than a very slow, lumbering VA payer in the past. Unfortunately, if the claim was not authorized at that time of admission, time when treatment started, the entire claim would then go to the VA as an unauthorized episode of care. And it's still handled in the traditional sense that fee basis would look at it with those three questions. But the final question, is there an opportunity for an authorization, or was there an opportunity to get it at that point, replacing that prior question? So things did change. They've changed for the better, in our opinion. It's been a little bit easier to work with them. Unfortunately, the authorization piece is becoming more and more difficult with the VA, which they have admitted they might have underprepared for. So, again, we talk about how the Mission Act changed things really for vets and for hospitals. Again, this is going back to the PC3 program being phased out and the Community Care Network, the CCN network, being phased in at that time. It was supposed to be a seamless transition. However, as we all know with the government, seamless transition does mean 2 years in the running. So, with that being said, it's taken Optum and TriWest a lot of time to be able to implement their systems across their regions. Regions 1 through 3, the regions that are represented on this HFMA call, are all served by Optum Serve. Their rollout was extraordinarily painful because it happened right in the middle of COVID, in the first wave of infections. So there was a lot of delay there at the end. So Optum has really stepped up in the past couple of months, trying to process the glut of claims that they have, or trying to get ahead of it and trying to really process claims now. None of the entities here work with TriWest other than on the Mission side, but out west, TriWest has really tried to ramp up their game as well, trying to make sure they're competing at the same pace with Optum. So it's been a good thing for hospitals in that they're getting the benefit of having the system no longer reliant on one carrier. It's now reliant on two, and Optum seems to be really picking up the slack from their horrible rollout. The authorization process, still the same with Optum versus TriWest. VA reaches out, the vet will reach out, and then they'll coordinate with Optum for the CCN component. So the authorizations still seem to be a little bit of an issue. HSRM is trying to relieve some of that pressure, but still a lot of those issues remain, and we'll talk about those in a few minutes. Other than that, you see the map there and how it's really cut up. TriWest really took everything west out of the Dakotas and Nebraska. So they've really taken a little bit of a hit, and then Optum trying to really make their footprint large as possible here and up north in the east. That brings us to polling question number 2. How does your organization manage or process VA claims? Is there a dedicated internal team with vendor support, fully outsourced to a vendor, or not sure? And this is more in line trying to figure out if your group might want assistance, they might want to look internally and see if it's something they can bring in-house and re-educate themselves on, or if the process itself is as good as it's going to get, you might not want to change at that point. So with that being said, VA continues to be a complex area. They're trying to make themselves a little bit more relevant and easier to work with. It just seems to sometimes just not work as well as they hope. And with that, it looks like we're going to have a fairly good spread, a dedicated internal team with about 33, which is 61%. The internal team with vendor support, 9. Fully outsourced to a vendor, 9%. And then not sure, 7 at 13%. So a lot of internal teams taking on the task of working with the VA. So that's a great sign to see. So continuing on. So the VA, throughout their illustrious career from about 1976 up to present, they've been an extraordinarily technologically adverse group to the point of they had a very old system known as Vista. It's not even related to Windows. That's from the 1970s. That was their claim adjudication system. It was originally a vacuum tube program that they have Frankensteined and been able to utilize to all the way up to about 2015, 2016. So you see that they were really trying to get as much out of it as possible. So with that in mind, the VA's EMR system might need a little bit of an upgrade. So the VA looked at a couple vendors. They looked at what the Department of Defense had on hand, and they started putting out bids for contracts and see if anyone wanted to work with them. Well, Cerner got a wonderful reaction from the DoD, and so the Department of Veteran Affairs thought we might want to go with Cerner as well. So in 2018, after some negotiation, Cerner signed on with the VA to implement their product across their entire spectrum of hospitals. The hope was that that system would be able to communicate directly with the DoD system, and they could really eliminate a lot of the eligibility issues that have plagued them for the past decade. Unfortunately, the two systems will not be able to communicate to one another, and the Cerner system that the VA purchased, which was an upgrade over the one from the DoD, was going to be a $10 billion investment. So fast forward a year to 2019, cost overruns have already hit this program to the tune of an additional $6.1 billion. In the Senate subcommittee that looked over the Veteran Affairs part, they recommended another watchdog be instituted for $750 million, which the VA pushed back on extraordinarily considering how much money they'd already spent. That watchdog did come to fruition. So now we're sitting at a price tag of $16.8 billion. So a little bit of an investment, and hopefully it's going to pay out in the end. As 2020 the first go live, which was scheduled for 3/28 of 2020, that's Spokane, Washington, that was delayed indefinitely. Subsequent webinars, we've heard that other entities have gone live. I've only been able to confirm one in Kentucky that went live in the late part of July, and it was a critical access facility that was a VA facility, so it was not a large group that went through the implementation process, but apparently it went very well. But it's still been an extraordinarily slow and sluggish implementation and rollout. So there have been some issues with it, to say the least. Going back to the Vista issue example, that was all the way up until about 2015, and then they decided it was time to upgrade their adjudication management system. So internally, they created something called eCAMS. They developed that over the past 3 years, and they rolled it out at the late part of 2019. The electronic claims adjudication management system is meant to be a fast track idea within the VA and how they're able to process claims quickly, and they're able to get through a large volume. Unfortunately, the rollout on this was not successful. It's been implemented, and then they forgot to train their fee-basis groups on it. So a roaming team of trainers for the 6 months helped every fee-basis unit become certified in it, and once they were good to go, the system really became effective at that point. So about the midpoint of 2020, you saw an uptick in claims being processed quicker. And then that brings us to the last upgrade that's really noticeable. That's known as the Customer Experience Portal, the CEP. This was an absolute home run by the VA due to the fact that you could see in real time where your claim was. You could see if it was received, if it was in processing, if it had been denied, if it had been processed, the reason for that denial, the remit for the processing, and you could actually download that information pretty quickly, and you could actually see the remits where payments had been sent over electronically, and you could assign those to your your posting department. You can get that money posted to the account as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, the CEP found that there were 2 weaknesses within their system that allowed individuals that were not that had not been confirmed Duo users. They were able to get into a lot of PHI. So they had to take it down, and they had to reconstruct their security system around those issues. So the CEP has been rolling out a more active users in the past couple weeks. And as a aside to that, they've been making users register with SAM.gov to confirm that they are who they say they are, along with having the ID.gov user badge. So they're really trying to have multiple ways to authenticate those individuals so that the PHI concerns are no longer valid. We're going to see that PHI issue rear its ugly head again here in just a couple minutes. With those headlines, we also look at what's become standardized in the past few months. So notice they've decided to really try and ramp this up and become more centralized in the idea of how notice should be given or how it can be communicated to the VA and they communicate back to you. I've referenced the HSRM, the Health Share Referral Management Portal, a couple times. That has been an absolute technological wonder for them in the past year. And then we'll also talk about the submission process, how they finally unified all of the fee-basis units together so that there's one address that if you have to submit something by mail, you can submit it to this address. And then they've been really good about communicating all of this to providers this year, or I should say last year. There have been a number of provider bulletins that have gone out giving pretty interesting updates as to what's coming down the pipe, and also telling us when those upgrades were becoming effective or going live. In some cases, they might give us a week. They've really tried to ramp that up to about 3 to 4 weeks and make sure entities are also trained on it or have at least seen it. So looking at the first standardization process, it's notice. And then we all know how difficult getting notice from the VA was, giving them notice that a veteran was in your hospital, and then getting the authorization process started was an extraordinarily Herculean effort. So you might be calling the local fee basis, you might be talking to the janitorial staff, you might be talking to the kitchen, you might be talking to one of the surgeons, and the VA fee-based department just was not available at that point. So it was very time-consuming, very, very hit or miss, and mostly misses at that point. But on June 8th, the VA decided it was time to consolidate this process into two methods of contact, one being a phone number and the other one being an email address. Entities could contact the VA at the time that treatment started. You have 72 hours from when treatment starts to get notice and authorization from the VA. And in this case, you now had a phone number and an email, and they wanted you to communicate specific information found in VA Form 10-10143G. And that little graphic up there at the top, if you can see that, that's the case-specific information that they wanted. Well, they found out that the same PHI bug that was affecting the CEP was also going to affect this standardization process. I believe that was discovered in October after a number of entities had requested the ability to send items encrypted, and they were still being rejected every time. The VA could not get them into a particular algorithm for them to be accepted, and then PHI was still being available, unfortunately. So with that, they went back to the drawing board very quickly, almost unheard of for this group. But on December the 21st of 2020, they moved to a secure portal for that type of notice to go through. So you would have to go to that email, that hyperlink that's posted there, and then you would give them your email. You could set up your password and username, and then you now had a portal in which you could give the same information that you gave as of underneath that prior VA form, and you're able to initiate the process. Now, since I'm not a user, I'm not an entity that can get into it and tell you how it's supposed to be utilized, I know from some conversations that there are emails that go back and forth, and there are also phone calls that are initiated as well. So it's a little bit of both ways of communicating with the VA at this point. That brings us to our second modernization item, the HSRM portal. During the course of 2019, when the CCN was coming about, the HSRM portal was being rolled out behind the scenes. This program was really meant to alleviate and accelerate referrals and approvals. And as you see through the timeline that's straight from their manual as well, it's really meant to make things streamlined, very one-directional, very easy for both hospitals and vets to know what's going on. So once CCN would receive a referral, in this case it's going to be Optum, that agency would then send out the referral to community providers, and whoever wanted to pick it up, they could then accept it or reject it. Once it was accepted, that record of an appointment was then going to be made at the facility level, and then the vet would come in, have their first appointment, and then at the end of that appointment, the medical records, whenever they're completed, could be uploaded through the portal, and then the VA is able to review that particular episode of care, and they're able to confirm the authorization. It also had a second well-meaning benefit at the same time. Once you've uploaded the medical records there, you no longer have to send them with the claim. So they're finally able to be cross-referenced, and you don't have to keep sending multiple copies of the same records to the VA. Unfortunately, to utilize this portal, you do have to jump through a couple of hoops. One, you do have to sign on with the CCN, which is Optum in this case. So your managed care department would already have to have a contract with them. Second, you do have to go through a training program. It is 2 hours. It's every Tuesday at noon Eastern Standard. I will be very blunt. You could find 2 hours of your time to better utilize. It's not very useful. They are really trying to answer questions on a first come, first served basis, and most of the questions don't apply to HSRM. So once you go through that training, that's not all that great, you then have to submit your authorization request to HSRM portal. Once that POC reviews your application, they will give you access through your ID.gov badge. You're able to access the program either as a read-only basis or as an individual that can alter the records and make the appointments. And then from there, you're really able to accept and reject and make movement and make a lot of movement with all the authorizations that your entity is going to receive. And then the final modernization part, this was really exciting to me because of the number of times I used to send claims to a fee basis unit in South Carolina. I do not think the mailbox that he sent me to existed, based off the number of claims that were never received. But prior to May 1st of 2020, you always had to submit your medical records and your claim to that local fee basis department that housed the veteran. It was extraordinarily difficult because that VA may not actually house the vet. They may only house them for that episode of care and then transfer them to another entity, another VA, where their benefit file was held. So you were always playing a guessing game. You might not actually get to the appropriate PO box or the appropriate address. So after May 1st of 2020, and this was the third time they tried to do this in the past 12 months, they actually had a one address submission path. So that address, that PO box in Tampa, is actually a scanning facility. If you have to mail something, you can mail it there. They upload it, they scan it, and then they send it to the appropriate fee basis department to where that veteran is housed. And then from there, it's processed as basically, it's akin to almost Blue Cross Blue Shield claims, where the alpha prefix goes in, you do with the local and the home plan. So this is sort of the home plan. This is really the central submission address in this case. If you are able to utilize the electronic clearinghouse, you can utilize Change. That path is recommended by the VA. Unfortunately, there is a data limit. So if you do attach the medical records and it caps out, your claim will not be received. So there is no workaround that at this point. I know with the previous announcement now that Change, I believe, is being acquired by Optum. I believe that might be changing. Please don't be offended by the pun. That might be modified later on in the future. So more details on that to come, hopefully. And that brings us to our third polling question. A little bit of a precursor to what we're going to talk about next. If the patient presents to the ER with Medicare coverage and Medicare processed that claim, leaving a deductible or coinsurance, can the hospital bill the VA for the remaining balance? Yes or no? So in talking, we talked about the agenda. There was a case that we talked about, the Wolf versus Wilkie case. This is the actual question that came about from that case, and we'll be talking about it a little bit later, but giving everyone a little bit of a taste of what we're going to be reviewing at that point. Looks like we're going to have a good tug of war here on this one. Yes is currently at 50%, 57%, no's at 42%. So a couple more seconds and we'll see who's going to come out on top here on the mountain.
Hey, Jason, Matt here. I just want to call a 15-minute time check, and then I'll close this poll in just a second.
All right. Thank you so much. So it looks like we are going to be yes 30 and then no 22. So looks like we're going to have some fun with this when we get to that particular slide. So this is going to bring us to the pain points, specifically Medicare. This is really an issue when we talk about the VA benefits and registration and eligibility. Who's primary? Well, the VA has laid out two specific statutes as to when other insurance is going to be primary or to when VA will be primary. 38 USC 1725, reimbursement for emergency treatment. This lays out the instances in which the VA is going to be the payer of last resort. And if it's ER treatments and the patient has commercial, Medicare, Medicaid, work comp, or a third-party liability carrier, that entity will always be primary over VA. VA will always be the payer of last resort in this case. Underneath 38 USC 1728, reimbursement of certain medical expenses, it lays out the specifics as to when the VA will always be primary. In those cases, it's when it's a service-related injury. So, i.e., anything that the vet experienced while deployed or in a theater of war or on active duty, that individual will always receive 100% VA coverage. And I hate to always use the same example, but it's the amputation of a limb while in the theater of war. If there's anything connected to that, it's always going to be covered. And anything that's not related to it would fall underneath that 1725 example. And with that, we do have three quick scenarios in which we do see multiple times when we work with our clients. In scenario A, veteran presents an ER complaining of a broken arm. Patient has Medicare and VA benefits. Arm was not broken during deployment or active duty. Who's the primary payer? In this case, it's going to be Medicare. This falls under 1725. Scenario B, veteran appears at the hospital for the cancer infusion therapy. Patient has Medicare and VA benefits. Infusion therapy previously authorized under VA choice. Who's the primary payer? In this case, it's going to be the VA benefits because of 1728. That veteran choice is preferred. And then the final scenario, the one in which we can look at both possibilities. Veteran presents to the ER complaining of chest pains. Patient has Medicare and VA benefits. Chest pains are a symptom of a condition acquired while deployed. In this case, since it is considered a service-related condition, the chest pains are going to be covered by the VA under the 1728. So those are three very generic ways in which we're going to look at the eligibility component. So keep that in mind. VA pain points, authorizations. When working a veteran claim, authorizations have to be initiated at the beginning of 72 hours prior. So again, another way of stating that is 72 hours from the start of treatment, that call needs to be made. So they need to figure out if a bed or a bay is available for the vet to be transferred to. If there is, the transfer occurs once the patient's medically stable. If for some reason that notification and authorization do not occur, you do have a very limited opportunity after discharge. You have 72 hours for request for service to be filed in RFS. Those are very, very, very limited success rates, so keep that in mind. So in cases in which your claims have been denied, you have two options when you're looking at the authorization route. If there's an authorization on file, i.e. was attempted and you have a number, anything along this line, this is really what you need to be considering. So under TriWest or Optum, you can utilize secondary authorization request or review. It's called a SAR. That's a way in which you can elongate or change the authorization to include the items that are on your claim. And then under the VA, again, we talked about that RFS. That's really that very limited ability 72 hours after discharge. So once those 3 days are passed, you've lost any type of opportunity. So please keep that in mind. Option two, if you want to go down the appeal route, it's going to be very difficult, but you do need to utilize the correct standard. So according to the VA statute 1703, if the patient feels their life is in danger and a reasonable person would conclude that services are needed, the VA will not deny the claim. You have to have that standard in your appeal or it will not be considered. Once you have that, give the analysis showing what was wrong with the patient. And if it meets that reasonable person standard, it should be reviewed independently and given a good chance for success. Most of the time, a reasonable person is not going to look at having a cough and going to the ER. So those have been sort of the issues that we see with appeals at this point. So that brings us to our fourth and final polling question. What is your current denial rate for VA claims? A, 5 to 10, B, 10 to 20, C, over 20, and D, not sure. And right now with the VA, they've been trying to curtail denials. They've been trying to work with hospitals to make sure that timely filing was looked at very favorably. At the end of the year, they gave everyone an extension on contractual timely filing denials all the way up to December 1st. That was the first time that happened ever. And they've been really trying to work with hospitals to make sure that authorizations are acquired, or at least they're trying to at least. So there's a lot of goodwill working with the VA right now. And with that, it looks like we have a pretty good idea. 25, not sure, 14, over 20, 10 to 24, and then 5 to 10, 3. So that's going to be the end of our polling questions. Thank you for participating with those. Let's keep rolling real quick with the rest of this. So VA pain points, the denials, the top 5 denials that we see with the VA and that they've published are timely filing, most notably 90 days for the mill bill. That's the ER claims that are non-service related, lacking the authorization. They did not meet the criteria. Patient not enrolled. Unfortunately, vets have to be enrolled with the VA every 24 months. So if they don't go there for 2 years and they let their eligibility lapse, if they go outside that particular hospital, they're not going to have their benefits covered, their claim covered. So it's a very non-appealable issue, and it becomes a patient liability issue at that point. Responsibility of TriOS Optum is the contractor issue, and then coding. I'm not a coder. I don't hold myself out as a coder. I've avoided as much as possible. But coding on the VA website, you can find a litany of the codes that they will cover, they will not cover, and a little bit of the explanation as to why they require some of the condition codes on some of those claims. That's all hidden away on the website right now. Used to be you could find it fairly easy. Now it takes a little bit of digging. So looking at the reimbursement for this, service-related is also 100%, non-service-related 69.5 to 70.5% of the Medicare allowable. Appeals, this is really meant to showcase what steps you need to go through when you're filing an appeal with the VA. You really want to clarify your issue right off the bat. You don't want them to be digging for it. You also want to clarify your rule as quickly as possible after that. That gives you a lot of credence with them because you're not going to waste their time. The analysis showing what steps your hospital went through, trying to find authorization, trying to do X, Y, and Z steps. You want to make sure you showcase that so that if it was a patient issue or if it was a VA issue, it's clearly defined. And then finally, the conclusion. You want them to review the case de novo, i.e., you want them to make a new review of your particular file and see if they will come to the same conclusion or if they will find it differently and authorize or process that claim for payment. So that's really how you want to try and work with the VA's appeal process. If you're not clear, you're not going to be getting a lot of work done with them. They're very they're not all that well to work with appeals, unfortunately. They're very old school. That brings us to the appeal roadmap. If you choose to go through the appeal route, it's going to be very uphill. It's very difficult to work with the VA when it becomes part of the appeal roadmap. So the first 2 steps, the local VA offices and the Board of Veteran Appeals, they're really going to look at the benefit file, which you do not have access to. The vet barely has access to it as well. So you're really going to be fighting blind in some cases. So you're going to have to go through those 2 offices first, and that's within the VA, which is not known to really want to overturn their own denials. You have 90 days for that first appeal. You get 1 year to try to get to the Court of Appeals. So each step, it's going to toll it, but you have to go through each step. If you don't do that, they're going to accelerate the time on you, and they're going to kick you right back to where you should be. So that's administrative law working against you every step of the way. So success rate, it's not a good overturn rate. It's usually in the it's usually in the high 9% to low 8%. That's not me misspeaking either. That's a single-digit overturn rate. Board of VA Appeals, if you get there, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult. And then, again, it goes back to that VA benefit file that you're not going to be able to look at, really. Roadblock, again, the VA benefit file, you're very rarely going to get to see it. and then significant language barrier. Administrative law standards continue to change. One law review article looked at it, and there were 5 different standards applied for one issue. So it's not really consistent across the board. There tried to be, but unfortunately, it seems to be a moving target from time to time. That brings us to Wolf versus Wilkie, that third polling question. This is now the VA coordination of care. This case made it so that the VA would work as a secondary insurance carrier. So in cases of ER claims, once the patient's been discharged, Medicare is paid, and there is a deductible or co-insurance, the VA will consider it for processing and payment. It will not pay co-pays. Co-pays are considered a cost sharing action, and they're too small to be considered. So again, the most exciting part to come out of the Court of Veteran Appeals is this case. It gives you an opportunity to get those Medicare deductibles and co-insurance amounts every time that a vet comes in. So good news for us at that point. And then finally, the COVID-19 response. On March 19th, the VA sent every non-essential worker home to be remote. They did that for 12 weeks, and then they came back. Well, things didn't go all that well after that surge. There have been some infections, unfortunately. So individuals that are considered non-essential have been working from home even longer, for longer periods of time now. That also brings us to authorizations. Those authorizations have not been extended in some cases. They wanted you to reapply, or they were going to let them somewhat lapse if they did not lapse within that certain amount of time, which would have been March 1 to September 30th. So in those instances listed below, ER, inpatient transportation, they're going to go ahead and let them naturally lapse and let you go ahead and reapply for those offs. And then finally, the authorizations for COVID tests. If it was part of the natural progression of why the vet was there and an authorization was on file, it would also cover a COVID test. So these are the 3 instances in which those tests would be covered in. And again, it continues to change now with the second surge coming about very forcibly. So they're trying to be more fluid with what they have at this point. So with that, that is the end of our presentation. Thank you all so much for your time and attention today. And it looks like we have a couple questions up at the top. Let's see. 32 VA healthcare leaders will be leaving on the 20th with the Honorable Robert Wilkie. Do you have concerns around the potential disruption of the current positive direction the VA has been going in related to claim response? With that notable number of leaders leaving, there's always going to be a little bit of an issue with dropping the ball. Naturally, I will always say there will be a dip in the positive direction. However, it should be more, I would assume it's going to be a little bit longer of a dip in response due to the issues that we have today and COVID response and whatnot. But I believe that the individuals they have lined up might have these same ideas in mind as to how to further the VA's mission. So it might be a little bit of a dip in production, but after that, it should pick up in the same direction, being very positive for vets and giving them more and more opportunities to find other inroads to treatment. I think that's the end of our hour.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have any additional questions, this is Matt. See my contact information on the screen and feel free to reach out to me directly or Ken Green. We will send a follow-up email to everyone with these written questions and answers later next week. That way you kind of you have some guidance to the questions that were asked today. Would like to thank Region 5 for partnering with us on this important topic, and to all of you that are out there protecting our communities during these challenging times. I'm going to pass the back over to Matt to finalize. Thank you again, and really look forward to seeing you out there maybe later in 2021 when vaccinations get out the door.
Yeah, thank you very much, Matt. Jason, thank you very, very much for sharing your expertise with everybody. To all the participants, we appreciate you joining today's webinar. We do have one more webinar session scheduled today at 1:30 p.m. Eastern. Katie O'Connor and Erica Gordon of CloudMed will share ways to find lost revenue in times of cash flow crisis. If you're interested in learning more or registering for any of the sessions, you can check out the events calendar on the Georgia HFMA website. I have also posted the registration link in the chat box for the session at 1:30 today. So if you're interested, feel free to grab that. As a reminder, I will send out the presentation and the recording to all participants by Friday of this week. You will receive that via email from me. So Matt, Jason, very grateful for your presentation and sharing your expertise. To all the attendees, thank you for joining the call today. And that does conclude our session. So everyone enjoy the rest of your day.